Friday evening. My best friend Ronnie had come over to hang out like he usually did. We were in the living room, talking and joking around when my stepmom, Natasha, came downstairs. At 63, Natasha had a presence about her that made people take notice. I'd never thought much about it before, but recently something had shifted. The way she dressed, the way she carried herself, it was like she knew exactly the kind of attention she commanded. Ronnie noticed it too. I could tell by the way his eyes followed her whenever she moved around the house. He'd glance at me, but I didn't say anything. It wasn't something we talked about, even though we both felt it. She came into the room holding 2 glasses of wine and smiled in a way that made my heart skip a beat. "You boys look like you're having fun," she said, handing us the glasses. "Mind if I join?" I glanced at Ronnie, who looked as uncomfortable as I felt, but neither of us said no. Natasha sat between us on the couch, crossing her legs, the hem of her robe sliding up just a little. I tried to focus on the TV, but it was impossible to ignore the tension building in the room. Ronnie was stealing glances at her, and I couldn't help but notice how she seemed to enjoy the attention. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Natasha leaned in, her voice low. "I've noticed how you two look at me sometimes," she said, her eyes flicking between us. My heart stopped. Ronnie and I exchanged nervous glances, but neither of us said anything. Natasha smiled, her hand brushing against my leg, then moving to Ronnie's. "Don't worry," she whispered. "I'm not offended. In fact, I've been thinking about it too." My mouth went dry. Ronnie's face was flushed, and I could see the mix of confusion and excitement in his eyes. Natasha's hand lingered on Ronnie's thigh, her fingers tracing small circles. "I know I'm older, but that doesn't mean I don't still have hopes and ambitions. And I've noticed you both have an interest. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking my video." She smiled at Ronnie, then at me, her hand moving higher up Ronnie's leg. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This was my stepmom, but there was something about the way she was looking at us, the way her touch made my skin tingle, that made it impossible to resist. Ronnie shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't move her hand away. Natasha's eyes flickered with satisfaction as she leaned in closer, her breath warm against my ear. "I think it's time we stop pretending," she whispered. "I can feel the tension between us. Why don't we explore it?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My stepmom, Natasha, was suggesting something I had never even imagined, at least not consciously. And yet there was a part of me that had thought about it. The way she moved, the way she smiled, the subtle touches. She had been teasing us for weeks, and now it was all coming to a head. Before I could respond, Natasha turned to Ronnie, her fingers tracing up his arm. "What do you think, Ronnie?" she asked, her voice low and inviting. Ronnie's breath hitched, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and desire. He looked at me, as if seeking permission, but I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mind screaming that this was wrong, but my body wasn't listening. I don't know," Ronnie stammered, his voice shaky. Natasha smiled, leaning closer to him, her lips inches from his ear. "Relax," she whispered, her hand moving up his chest, fingers teasing the edge of his shirt. "We're all adults here. Let's just enjoy the moment." Ronnie swallowed hard, his gaze flicking between me and Natasha. He was clearly torn, but the temptation was too strong. Natasha leaned in and kissed him softly on the neck, her lips barely brushing his skin. Ronnie let out a soft gasp, and I could see the way his body responded to her touch. Don't miss out on the journey to 1,000 subscribers. Hit that subscribe button now and be part of something big before everyone else. He wasn't going to stop this. Neither was I. Natasha pulled back slightly, her eyes dark with desire as she looked at me. "And what about you?" she asked, her hand now resting on my thigh. "I know you've thought about this too." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. But then Natasha leaned in, her lips brushing against mine, soft and tentative at first. It was a gentle kiss, but when I didn't pull away, she deepened it, her hand sliding up my thigh as her other hand moved to Ronnie's leg again. I felt a rush of warmth, my heart racing as I responded to her kiss. It was unexpected, thrilling, and I was caught up in the moment, forgetting everything else. Natasha pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting mine, and I could see a mix of mischief and satisfaction in her gaze. "Good," she whispered before turning back to Ronnie. She kissed him too, more confidently this time, her hand moving up his chest. I watched, transfixed, as she deepened the kiss, her body pressing closer to his. The atmosphere was charged, and I could feel the heat between us growing. Natasha wasn't holding back anymore, and neither were we. She moved between us, her hands exploring our bodies, her lips moving from Ronnie to me and back again. Natasha's hands were everywhere, resting on my shoulder, on Ronnie's back, pulling us closer together as we shared a moment of laughter, guiding us into this strange, thrilling territory. Her touch was electric, sending waves of excitement through me, and from the way Ronnie was breathing, I could tell he felt the same. For what felt like hours, we were caught in a whirlwind of kisses, touches, and soft gasps. Natasha was in control, leading us both, her hands and lips igniting a fire inside me I hadn't known was there. My stepmom, this woman I had known for years, was now the center of my universe, and I couldn't think of anything else but her. At some point, I felt Natasha's hand on my chest, pushing me back gently. I lay down on the couch, my breath coming in short gasps as she climbed on top of me. Her robe had come undone a little, and the sight of her made my pulse quicken. Natasha leaned down, kissing me deeply, her hands moving up my arms as she pressed herself against me. Ronnie was beside us watching, his eyes dark with desire. Natasha turned to him, her hand reaching out, pulling him closer. She kissed him again, her body still pressed against mine, and I could feel the heat radiating off her. We were lost in the moment, the three of us tangled together, our breaths mingling, our bodies moving in sync. As Natasha kissed Ronnie, her hands roamed over my chest, fingers tracing patterns that sent shivers down my spine. I closed my eyes, letting myself get lost in the sensation of her touch, the sound of her breathing, the way her body moved against mine. The minutes blurred together as the intensity between us built. Natasha's kisses became more urgent, her touch more demanding, and I could feel the passion between us reaching its peak. Ronnie was right there with us, his hands exploring Natasha's body, his lips finding her neck, her shoulders. Finally, Natasha pulled away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at both of us, her eyes filled with a kind of satisfaction I had never seen before. "You boys did well," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say. My mind was still spinning from everything that had happened. I glanced at Ronnie, who looked just as dazed as I felt. We had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and there was no going back now. Natasha smiled, a knowing smile, and leaned in to kiss me one last time, soft and lingering. "I think we all needed that," she said, her voice full of contentment. She stood up, tying her robe loosely around her waist again, and walked out of the room without another word. Ronnie and I sat there in stunned silence, still trying to process everything that had just happened. After a long pause, Ronnie finally spoke, his voice shaky. "What just happened?" I shook my head, still in disbelief. I didn't know what to say. We both sat there for a while longer, the weight of what had just transpired settling over us. We both knew Natasha was attractive, alluring even, but neither of us had expected things to escalate the way they had tonight. Now that it was over, I couldn't help but wonder what this meant for us, for me and Ronnie, for me and Natasha. We had crossed into a territory we could never come back from, and I had no idea what the consequences would be. As Ronnie finally stood up to leave, he looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and excitement. "You think this is gonna happen again?" I didn't have an answer for him. All I could do was shrug, my mind still foggy from the whirlwind of what had just happened. Ronnie stood there for a second longer, waiting for me to say something, but I stayed silent. Finally, he just gave me a half nod and headed toward the door. As he opened it, he paused and glanced back over his shoulder. "Let me know if anything happens, all right?" I nodded, still not sure what to say. "Yeah, sure." When the door closed behind him, I was left alone. The weight of everything that had happened sank in. The house was quiet again, almost too quiet. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel the lingering sensation of Natasha's touch, her warmth, her smile. It was surreal, like I had just lived through a dream, except this was all too real. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the empty room, my thoughts racing in circles. What did this mean? How were we supposed to go back to normal after what had just happened? And the bigger question, did I even want to? The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My head was spinning with everything that had gone down the night before. Natasha was still in the house, just upstairs, and I had no idea how to face her. My mind replayed the moments over and over again. The laughter, the shared glances, the way she made me feel. It all seemed so far away, and yet it had been just a few hours ago. I dragged myself out of bed, unsure of what to expect. As I went downstairs, the smell of coffee hit me. There she was, Natasha in the kitchen, dressed casually, completely at ease as if nothing had happened. She looked up when she saw me, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Morning," she said casually, like it was just another normal day. "Morning," I mumbled, not sure how to act around her now. My mind flashed back to the previous night, but Natasha didn't seem the least bit fazed. She moved around the kitchen, making breakfast as if everything was perfectly fine. I stood there awkwardly, watching her. Finally, I couldn't take the tension anymore. "About last night," I started, but my voice trailed off, unsure of how to even begin. Natasha turned and gave me a knowing look, her smile softening. "I figured you'd be thinking about that," she said, leaning against the counter. "You don't need to worry." "How can I not worry?" I blurted out. "What happened was, Natasha held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "I know it was unexpected, but it doesn't have to be complicated. We're all adults, and we made a choice. We can leave it at that or—" Her voice trailed off, and I noticed the way she tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking with mine. "We can explore it a bit more." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what I expected her to say, but it wasn't that. Natasha wasn't treating this like a mistake. She wasn't acting like we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Instead, she was calm, collected, like she had thought this through and was giving me an option. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quieter now, unsure of what I wanted the answer to be. Natasha stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "I mean, if you're interested, if Ronnie is interested, we don't have to stop here." Her hand gently touched my arm, the same warmth I had felt last night surging through me again. "There's no need to make things awkward unless you choose to." I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Was this really an option? Could this really continue? And if it did, what would that mean for all of us? Before I could answer, the sound of my phone buzzing broke the moment. I glanced down to see a text from Ronnie. "Hey man, what's going on?" Natasha saw the message too, and a small smile curled at the corners of her lips. "Looks like Ronnie's curious," she said softly. "Maybe he's wondering if last night was a one-time thing." I stared at the text, my thoughts swirling. Part of me wanted to say it was all over, that last night was a mistake we could chalk up to too much wine and a moment of weakness. But another part of me, the part that had been caught up in Natasha's touch, her smile, the way she made me feel, wasn't so sure. Without really thinking, I responded to Ronnie's text. "You free later? We should talk." Ronnie came over that afternoon, and as soon as he walked in, I could tell he was just as confused as I was. He avoided eye contact at first, looking around the house like he was half expecting Natasha to appear any second. "So what the hell happened last night?" he finally asked, his voice low and unsure. I leaned back on the couch, trying to find the right words. "I don't know, man. It just happened." Ronnie sat down across from me, shaking his head. "Yeah, but that was your stepmom, and we were both involved." He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly still trying to wrap his head around it. I don't know what to make of it. I hesitated, not sure how much to say. Should I tell him about the conversation I'd had with Natasha earlier, about how she had left the door open for us to continue whatever this was? Before I could decide, Natasha entered the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. She looked at Ronnie, then at me, and smiled. "Hey, Ronnie," she greeted him softly, her voice smooth. "I was hoping we could talk." Ronnie's eyes widened slightly as he glanced at me, clearly unsure of what was about to happen. Natasha sat down beside me, her hand lightly brushing my knee before turning her attention to Ronnie. "I know last night was unexpected," she began, her tone calm and steady, "but I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. I don't want things to be weird between us. What happened last night doesn't have to be a one-time thing, but only if it's something you both want." There was a long pause as Ronnie and I exchanged glances, trying to process what Natasha was suggesting. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made my pulse race and my mind spin. Finally, Ronnie spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "And if we say yes, what happens then?" Natasha's smile widened slightly. "Then we see where it goes," she said simply. "No pressure, no strings, just us." I could feel the electricity in the room as the three of us sat there, the weight of Natasha's words sinking in. This was real. She was serious, and now the choice was in our hands. Ronnie looked at me again, his eyes searching for some kind of confirmation, some sign of what I was thinking. In that moment, I realized that I didn't want to say no. The part of me that had been fighting this, the part that was scared of what it all meant, was losing the battle to the part of me that wanted more. I nodded slowly, my heart racing. "I'm in," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through me. Ronnie hesitated for a moment longer, but then he nodded too. "Yeah," he said, his voice firm. "I'm in." Natasha smiled, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. She stood up and took a step toward Ronnie, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "Good," she whispered. "Let's not waste any more time." She leaned in and kissed him softly, her lips lingering on his for just a moment before pulling away. Then she turned to me, her eyes full of promise as she leaned down and kissed me too. The same soft, lingering kiss that sent a shiver down my spine. As Natasha pulled back, she smiled at both of us, her gaze filled with the same intensity that had been there the night before. "Now," she said softly, "let's continue what we started." The rest of the afternoon blurred together in a whirlwind of sensations, kisses, touches, the warmth of our bodies pressed together as we explored this new and thrilling territory. Natasha was in control, guiding us both, her touch igniting a fire in me that I hadn't known existed. Every time I thought we were pushing the boundaries too far, she would pull us back in, reassuring us with a kiss, a whisper, a touch. Ronnie and I found ourselves caught in the same current, our bodies moving in sync with Natasha's, the tension between us building and building until it finally exploded in a moment of pure, undeniable excitement. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, just the three of us, lost in the moment.